So the philosopher Francis Bacon states, knowledge is power. To put it one way, if life is complex like a game of chess, we need to know the rules on how to play it effectively. So let's paint a picture and give some examples of where knowledge is power. Example 1. Now Basquiat was one of the best painters in the world, and he utilized the knowledge of Gray's Anatomy. He also utilized the knowledge of the Bible to craft innovative pieces of work. He was the king of neo-expressionism and the king of the art world. Example 2. Now, how did homosapiens survive in the jungle? How did they survive against lions? How did they survive against the snakes? Now, homosapiens evolved through effective communication, fire to cook and fire to see their enemies. They also had the ability to develop weapons to deal with the physical shortcomings. So again, this is another example where knowledge was imperative. Okay, so we've kind of just gone into the deep end, and we've given some really intriguing examples already of Basquiat and homosapiens. But let's step back and let's define these terms. And when we talk about terms, we're talking about the term of knowledge and the term of power. So when we're talking about knowledge, what are we talking about? It's a good question. And when we're referencing knowledge, we're talking about information and skills acquired through education, experience, or both. So here's a quick example. The legendary fighter Evander Holyfield has a skill of boxing, and this has been provided through the experience of boxing, the knowledge of boxing coaches, and through this process, he has developed this skill. And what do we mean when we talk about power? Well, in simple sense, power is, quote, the capacity to influence the behavior of others or the course of events, end of quote. An example could be a YouTube influencer has power because they influence or potentially influence large groups of people. Robert Greene, the well-known author, has power because he has influence over his loyal fans. Okay, so we've given some basic definitions of knowledge and a very basic definition of power. So after understanding these terms, let's move forward accordingly. Okay, so I think I'm gonna have to go to the whiteboard animation on this one. So let's explore my train of thought. So let's take a manager. A manager typically has knowledge, skills in their area of expertise. If he or she applies for another job, that experience could help them influence the interviewer in a positive way. There is an important distinction here, because knowledge does not always mean power, but it's hard to have power without sufficient knowledge. Maybe effective knowledge can increase the possibility of effective power. That may be a more accurate analogy, but phonetically, that does not work as well. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the animation part. So now I'm going to give a basic example, mainly utilizing the character of RZA. For those that don't know, RZA is part of the Wu-Tang Clan, and he created the album 36 Chambers and Wu-Tang Forever, as well as other albums with the group. He's also known for other things, whether it's business, film, chess, etc. So we're going to use an example of him, and then I might even use an example of Jordan Peterson as well. So let's get back to this. So when we talk about knowledge, RZA, the genius who formed the Wu-Tang Clan, used knowledge to build probably the biggest brand in hip-hop. He used his knowledge to fuse hip-hop, chess with kung fu, and this was completely innovative at the time. He also built an empire which has gone from strength to strength, and other members have branched out to create their own individual brands. For example, GZA from the Wu-Tang Clan has used his knowledge of science to add further depth to his hip-hop identity. So we see knowledge being used here effectively. And Jordan Peterson, the author, used the knowledge of lobsters and serotonin to develop an innovative argument that was one of the most intriguing in his book 12 Rules for Life. He also used the biblical knowledge that he had to appeal arguably to a biblical audience. So we can see so many examples of where knowledge is power. So these are real examples of how people have used knowledge as power, whether it's new information or bringing old information to light in an innovative way. And remember, and I think this is quite an important point, So many things in life are repackaged. And here's a question to ponder. Is anything original? Or is it just new information or old information repackaged? But that's a bit of a deflection, so let's get back to it. Okay, I want to keep everyone visually engaged, so I'm going to go back to the whiteboard animation. Here's a question. If knowledge is power, is there another side of the coin? Maybe this is that side of the coin. What ethical considerations arise when knowledge is wielded as a source of power? What am I talking about? For example, the knowledge to manipulate is powerful, but is it not unethical? And here's a question. Do we need to consider the ethical implications of knowledge? And should there be a relationship between knowledge and ethics? Now, some may say the book 48 Laws of Power was a book of manipulation, but is there some type of ethical connotation? For example, by learning about manipulation, do you learn to overcome it? These are interesting questions to ponder. Okay, so we've kind of ascertained that effective knowledge is power, but now we've got into this whole thing about what are the ethical implications? What are the ethical implications? And these ethical implications may be important not just to oneself, but they also may be important to society. And I think it may be a good idea to think about that relationship. Okay, let's do a 360 and let's talk about Isaac Newton. Now, the scientific revolution during the 16th and 17th centuries is a prime example. This is where Isaac Newton made the groundbreaking discoveries in mathematics and science. He conducted experiments in the nature of light and formulated the laws of nature motion. He discovered, as is famously acknowledged, gravity by observing the fall of an apple. And you may ask, how intelligent was Isaac Newton? Well, Isaac Newton was regarded as one of the most brilliant and influential scientists in history. And he had knowledge, information and skill, and he had power, i.e. influence. Another random example is Jeff Bezos. Yes, Jeff Bezos. Because in his quest to become successful, he had multifarious amounts of knowledge. I know what you're thinking. What do you mean he had multifarious amounts of knowledge? Well, he had knowledge in science and engineering, and this technological knowledge was extremely important. He also had business knowledge through experience at financial firms. This benefited him in setting up his business. His effective knowledge was power with regards to resources and money. So we've given two more examples here with Isaac Newton and Jeff Bezos. And I guess if we think more about this, we can just go on and on. Just want to make another point before we move on. There's knowledge of self, there's knowledge of others, there's knowledge of how we're perceived, and there's knowledge of the world, and we can go further into that. When we think about knowledge of how we're perceived, think of this. How are you perceived by your manager? How are you perceived by your partner? How are you perceived by your friends? How are you perceived by your family? How are you perceived by your co-worker? How are you perceived by your dog? You get the point. The point here is that as we go down this road of knowledge, this road keeps going and it's stimulating. So I'm undecided whether to go back to whiteboard animation. I guess you will see whether I did or not. Anyway, here's a question. Is negative knowledge not power? Let me repeat that. Is negative knowledge not power? Now, I think negative knowledge is not power. Let me give an example. So let's say you're getting a consultant from YouTube and they're giving you bad advice, i.e. bad knowledge. So they're saying post once a month, don't be consistent, thumbnails don't matter, don't do SEO, etc. Now this negative knowledge will give you no power, i.e. will give you no influence. So let's give another example. If you're told you don't have to be qualified to be a social worker, then this again is negative knowledge that will give you no power. Again, power in this context is being a social worker. Or if someone tells you you don't need qualifications to teach law or to be a lawyer, then this negative knowledge will lead to a negative outcome, i.e. no power. The point of this section is for you to use discernment, because not all knowledge is power, because not all knowledge is effective. So for me, the takeaway point here is that we need to find the right knowledge, because there is a distinction. There is a distinction between the right knowledge and the wrong knowledge. And perhaps this path of finding the right knowledge is a long, long road, which leads to that question, that important question: how do we find the right knowledge? And that's something for us to think about. If we know that knowledge is power, and if we know that effective knowledge is power, how do we go down this long road of finding the right knowledge? So in conclusion, I would like to say the following. Number one, the story of human evolution using fire effective communication shows knowledge of power. Number two, the story of Basquiat is a story where he captures different forms of knowledge and uses this as fuel for his paintings. Number three, we have found a more appropriate term for knowledge is power, which could be effective knowledge increases the potential of effective power. Unfortunately, that term does not have the same ring to it. Number four, we have again seen examples of the RZA from Wu-Tang Clan and Jordan Peterson utilizing knowledge effectively in different ways. Number five, we have also explored why negative knowledge is not power. Number six, we have looked at the relationship between knowledge and ethics, and perhaps these two concepts are like separate variables. And finally, number seven, we have established an important question: how do we find effective knowledge? So I sincerely hope everyone has enjoyed the content. Now, if you want to support the channel, like and subscribe.